Going back to one of our top stories now, the bilateral meeting between India and Russia in Moscow. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is celebrating his country's close ties to Russia. He told supporters the two countries have a relationship built on mutual trust and respect. But Modi's relationship with Russian President Vladimir Putin is causing worry in Washington. Our next guest is in Moscow covering the meeting between these two leaders. Suhasini Haidar is a diplomatic affairs editor at The Hindu, an Indian English language daily newspaper. Suhasini, good to see you. There's been a lot of activity in the last couple of days. What has been accomplished so far in the meetings between Modi and Putin?
Well, thank you for having me on. We're in Moscow, and as you can see with the flags behind me, the Indian flag, we've had a press conference by the Foreign Secretary, and Prime Minister Modi is now leaving for the airport. He's headed to Austria next. Now, the importance of this visit was that for the last 3 years, since the Ukraine war, actually, India and Russia had not been able to meet for what used to be an annual event, the annual summit. So this is the first time it's happening in 3 years. It's the first time Mr. Modi has traveled to Russia since the war in Ukraine began. And it is also actually his first visit abroad for a bilateral visit. So it tells you how important this meeting was for him. The two leaders have met for about 8 or 9 hours, we were told, over the last 2 days, including a private dinner at Putin's dacha, where he personally drove Prime Minister Modi through on a golf cart. The two were seen really spending a lot of time together, feeding the horses and that sort of thing. And then after formal talks today, they signed a number of agreements. The large agreements are about economic issues. The two countries deciding to increase their bilateral trade to $100 billion. Now, a few years ago, that would have seemed impossible because India-Russia bilateral trade, even though political ties were good, bilateral trade was about $10 billion. But since the Ukraine war, India has begun to increase its intake of Russian Ural oil really multifold, going 20 times more than before. In fact, at the beginning, it was just minuscule. But because of the discounts that Russia has been giving India, India has taken a large part of its oil intake now from Russia, and it's already up to about $60 billion in oil trade. So that was one part of the meeting. The other was dealing really with the economic aspects of the results of the Ukraine conflict on things like Indian companies that fear getting sanctioned. So payment mechanisms to kind of get around those sanctions, as well as a specific problem in the last few months of Indians coming to Russia and then either being misled or joining the Russian military for some reason and then finding themselves at the front lines. So an agreement really that if Indians have gone to the front line and wish to return, wish to get military discharges, Mr. Putin has accepted Mr. Prime Minister Modi's request that be expedited.
Okay, there's some major issues being addressed. I just wanted to ask you, because Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, has come out with a posting on X. He's been very upset, very critical of Modi meeting with Putin, specifically saying, how can the leader of the world's greatest democracy, largest democracy, meet with the world's most bloody, brutal leader at this point? So what, if anything, does Modi have to do to address that?
Well, look, the pictures of the two leaders speak for themselves, and those came on the very day of those 42 missile attacks on Ukraine, where the Ukrainian government said 37 people have been killed, including children at a hospital. Prime Minister Modi certainly addressed some of that when he spoke to President Putin in terms of saying that everyone is pained when civilians die, especially children. But he did not make a specific comment really other than saying that India stands with peace through dialogue and diplomacy. We've already heard those harsh words really from the Ukrainian president, but also from the US State Department that said we are concerned about India's ties with Russia. India has not yet responded to that particular comment, except to say that India stands really on the side of peace and sovereignty and territorial integrity, those kind of things. But, there is no getting away from the timing of this particular meeting. Even as we speak, of course, they're in Washington. NATO leaders are getting together. Mr. Zelensky will be there. Other Western allies from Asia will be there. But here in Moscow, it will be the picture of Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin coming together and really, in a sense, countering the idea, if any, from Washington that Russia is isolated. So I think there's no question that India has clearly expressed where it stands on this conflict. It may also be possible that Prime Minister Modi is coming here 3 years later because New Delhi senses a turn, an irreversible turn perhaps in the Ukraine conflict, that perhaps there's going to be not much more in terms of taking and giving territory, and the conflict itself could get frozen. That might be one perception. The other is really that Prime Minister Modi has had a strained relationship with the West on many issues in the last few months, and including, of course, with Canada. And this might be a way of reasserting some of India's traditional friendships and Prime Minister Modi's own personal ones. Finally, there's the question of the Russia-China relationship and them coming closer together, and India having its concerns about that. So I think there's a lot of geopolitical messaging going out from here. It may not be something that those in Western capitals really want to hear, particularly, as I said, at this point.
Okay. Suhasini Haidar, thank you so much for your time. Shukriya.